Leonarda's life began with a tragic story. It was alleged that her mother Emilia became pregnant with Leonarda as a result of kidnapping and assault by Leonarda's biological father, Mariano. Living under different times and mentality back then, the two were forced to marry due to the pregnancy, and Emilia gave birth to Leonarda on November 14, 1893. Emilia had difficulties connecting with her daughter, probably because Leonarda's conception and birth was a result of a traumatic event. Leonarda's father died a year after she was born, and Emilia remarried soon after, where she stepped into a happier marriage and had 6 more children. But the healthier life her mother made for herself didn't prevent her from being cruel and emotionally abusive towards Leonarda. In fact, in a later biography, Leonarda expressed that she had a turbulent upbringing, raised by an unloving mother and family, and had her siblings reinforcing the situation by isolating her even more. Leonarda also suffered from epilepsy, and her whole family treated her ailment as a burden instead of supporting her, and they never shied away from expressing their unwillingness to deal with it. With an unloving and unhappy childhood on her shoulders, Leonarda turned from an early age into the arms of men to find love. In her late teens, she met a registry officer named Rafael Passarti, and the two fell in love and decided to get married. But with the concept of only pre-arranged marriage being allowed back then, her mother and stepfather disapproved her marrying someone of her choice and not theirs, and reportedly Emilia cursed the marriage and future children on Leonarda's wedding day, telling her, quote, "No child of yours will ever survive," end quote. The curse woke in a childhood fear in Leonarda, because when she was just a child, a gypsy had also predicted a similar bitter fate for her when she warned her that once married and had children, all of her children would die. Adding to this, shortly after the first reading, another gypsy also read her hands, giving her an ominous reading, quote, "I see in your right hand the prison, in the left the asylum," end quote. And that shall soon make sense. Whether all of these events combined with her childhood set the stage for a life full of fear is unknown, but most likely all had some contributing aspect in her later actions. Leonarda and Rafael married shortly before the First World War and went to live in Lariano. Although initially they were happy there, they were forced to relocate in 1930 in Correggio when the Irpinia earthquake destroyed their home. Once they settled in Correggio, Leonarda used the governmental compensation for the earthquake and launched her own store, where she was trading second-hand clothing and selling homemade baked goods and homemade soaps. But with every passing year, the recollections of her mother's curse and the readings echoed stronger and louder in her mind, until this developed into a sad reality for her. Leonarda was pregnant 17 times, where 14 of her children died either due to a miscarriage, a premature birth, or at infancy. By 1934, only 4 of her children survived, her 3 sons and her daughter. She linked back this misfortune to the malediction of her mother and the gypsies' prophecies, and in the dread of losing her 4 surviving children as well, Leonarda became overprotective and set up her whole life to safeguard her children's lives at all costs. She even heavily trained herself to become a fortune teller by exploring the world of magic, palmistry, and astronomy, so she could supposedly learn how to neutralize spells and curse and ward off bad luck. Aside from her homemade goods and second-hand items business, she started offering services as a sorceress and read palms and tarot cards to all of her friends and neighbors who often visited her to seek advice for their life and destiny. Allegedly, she also hypnotized clients, claiming to have special powers to make their dreams come true. Within the community, Leonarda was a well-known and well-respected businesswoman and citizen, and by all accounts, and despite her problematic childhood, she seemed to have created a close, happy family, with her always striving to raise her children filled with love and devotion by their mother. In 1939, Leonarda's eldest and favorite son, Giuseppe, graduated from the University of Milan and was working as a tutor at the National College of Correggio. But the Second World War was fast approaching, and Leonarda's daily nightmares became more and more vivid with the prospect of her son Giuseppe being taken away from her to fight in the war. And in her own words, she later on described her fear and feelings as, quote, "I can't bear the loss of another child. Almost every night I dream of the little white coffins of those others, swallowed up one after another by the black earth," end quote. It seemed like her mother's curse and the gypsy's predictions endured imprinted in her mind, and the loss of her 14 children reinforced it. And once her son received notice to attend the Italian military, her fears and superstition intensified beyond control. She then became determined that she wasn't going to lose another child and that it was time for her to take drastic and desperate actions. She turned to deadly actions that she envisioned would be the only way to save her son's life: human sacrifices. Leonarda's superstition and years of educating herself around the topics of fortune-telling took a twisted outcome when she concluded in her distorted mind that the only way to break the curse her mother put upon her and to keep her son alive was to exchange human lives for her son's safe return from the war. Her job as a palm reader brought her many female clients who wished to have a better and brighter future, or women who were desperate to abandon their single life and to find a man to marry. That included a lifelong spinster, 73-year-old Faustina Setti, one of Leonarda's neighbors and clients, who despite her age she still wished to find someone to marry and to end the loneliness she felt. Faustina often visited Leonarda to seek advice for her love life and to read her future, so Leonarda was well aware as to how desperate she was to find a man and decided to exploit that fact. Leonarda informed Faustina that the cards have finally spoken and she found her a match, a non-existent long-lost friend of hers who lived in the province of Pola. He was to be a wealthy gentleman who was also looking for companionship and had agreed to marry Faustina. Leonarda took advantage of the trust Faustina had in her and convinced her not to inform anyone of her good news, supposedly so she wouldn't arouse jealousy from other single women in the neighborhood. She also instructed her to sell everything she was to leave behind and pack up all her remaining belongings to depart for Pola. But a final farewell to her friend and matchmaker was proven fatal for Faustina. The poor woman was over the moon that she finally found a man to marry and even dyed her hair black to look younger for her future husband. But before leaving, she wanted to thank Leonarda for all the help she provided. When Faustina walked into the house, Leonarda started to boil a giant pot with hot water. But before her sinister plans were put in full motion, she offered a glass of wine to Faustina, which she secretly drank, and then persuaded her to write letters and postcards to her friends and family to inform them of the good news. Of course, that was part of her disturbing plan, not to arouse suspicions by having Faustina's family reassured that Faustina was well, alive, and happy. Sadly, Faustina would never make the trip. At the end of the last sentences she wrote to her loved ones, she fell unconscious and then received blows to the head with an axe. Once the blood coagulated and dried up, she collected it, grounded it, and then mixed it with flour, sugar, chocolate, milk and eggs, kneading all the ingredients together to make large quantities of pastries. She had the nerve to feed those cakes to her friends and even her own children. Since she had an excess amount of blood, Leonarda also callously used the blood to make small chocolates that she shared with the children in the neighborhood. As for the letters Faustina wrote to her relatives, Leonarda sent her son Giuseppe to Pola to mail them back to the addresses Faustina wrote, without explaining to him the content nor who was it from. She even made money out of the horrendous situation by selling the items Faustina packed to take with her to Pola and took her remaining money as well. The second victim Leonarda chose to sacrifice was 55-year-old teacher Francesca Soavi. This time Leonarda played on Francesca's wish to leave Correggio to seek a decent job in another city. She promised the ambitious woman a position in a girls' school di Piacenza through her supposed connections and ensured her that the job had high prospects. Of course, Francesca was very pleased and accepted the offer. Just as Faustina, Francesca diligently prepared for her trip and packed up her things ready to leave behind her old life and pursue her new job. On September 5, 1940, she went to give her goodbyes to Leonarda and to express her gratitude before her departure. But sadly for her, the story repeated itself. Leonarda asked Francesca to write letters to her family detailing her plans, offered her a lace ring, and as soon as she felt unconscious, Leonarda killed her the same way she did Faustina. She disposed of the body parts the same way she did with Faustina and resorted to the same recipe to make her special cakes and chocolates, offering them around to unsuspecting friends and family. She also sold all of Francesca's belongings, got all of her money, and yet again sent her son Giuseppe to mail the letters and postcards, this time from Piacenza. And just as with Faustina, nobody suspected anything. Just 25 days after Francesca's murder, Leonarda attacked and killed her third and final victim. This time, she chose 55-year-old Virginia Cassioppo, a former soprano singer who was also looking for a job. Leonarda claimed to have found her a job in Florence as a secretary. As with the other two victims, she instructed Virginia to keep her good news a secret, and on September 30, 1940, Virginia too came to give her goodbyes to her friend. Leonarda followed the exact same pattern, only this time when she boiled the body parts, she decided it would be a good idea to add cologne in it to make soap out of it, and offered her friends and neighbors the bars of soap along with her special cakes and chocolates. How more disgraceful could she get? In her later testimony, she confessed in total apathy, quote, "After a long time on the boil, I was able to make some of the most acceptable creamy soap. I gave bars to neighbors and acquaintances. The cakes too were better. That woman was really sweet." End quote. What a sick, evil individual. Although Leonarda thought she was committing the perfect crimes and managed to shy away from any suspicion, Leonarda's luck ran out when one of Virginia's relatives was not entirely convinced of Virginia's departure and went straight to the police. Virginia's sister-in-law felt very troubled when she saw Leonarda selling all of Virginia's clothing and jewelry after her sudden disappearance, and when she connected it with the fact that the last time she saw Virginia was when she entered Leonarda's residence, she took her suspicions and fears to the police. The police in turn followed a trail of a treasury voucher that belonged to Virginia all the way back to Leonarda's friend, a man who was instructed by Leonarda to cash it in. Leonarda's friend told police that he was just asked by Leonarda to run this errand in exchange of compensation, but that he had no further knowledge of anything more than that. So the police decided it was time to pay a visit to Leonarda's house. Leonarda initially denied all the allegations and kept repeating that she knew nothing of the fate of the three missing women. That was until police turned their interest to her son Giuseppe, who confessed mailing the letters of the victims. In her fears of her son being convicted for all of her actions, she immediately confessed everything. She was arrested and charged for the chilling murders of the three poor women who wanted nothing but a better life for themselves. Leading up to the trial, Leonarda had undergone a psychiatric evaluation under court's orders to determine whether she was fit to stand trial. The director of the criminal asylum of Aversa determined her to be fit for the trial, and she was awaiting for the trial to take place on June 12, 1946. During the 5 years of anticipation for her final fate, she wrote a memoir where she described in full detail the murders, the premeditation, and her unsettling and disturbing soap and cake procedures. At the trial, the 50-year-old showed no remorse for her crimes, and in fact she was reported that she had a sparkle in her eyes, almost hiding an inner pride every time her evil deeds were brought up or explained to the court. She defended her son, testifying that he knew nothing about the murders, nor the content and purpose of the letters, and even had the nerve to demonstrate to the court, without sorrow, her soap and cake recipe and skills to prove that she acted alone. The only time Leonarda expressed any emotion was after the closing arguments on July 29, 1946, when she was found guilty on the counts of premeditated murder, aggravated triple murder, 3 counts of robbery, and 3 counts of desecration of a corpse. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison and 3 years in a women's criminal asylum. Leonarda died of cerebral apoplexy on October 15, 1970 in the asylum, just as the gypsy predicted, on the one hand, prison, on the other, the asylum. Some of the objects she used in the murders, including the pot in which the victims were boiled in, are on display at the Criminological Museum in Rome.